Go for it.
Hello, this is Heather Jane Gray, Chief Executive of Synergy Global. Good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody. We've had nearly 3,500 registrations from across the world, which is great for this conference. We're having a really lovely week, very multicultural, so a warm welcome to everybody. On behalf of the Synergy Global team and our wonderful partner, Open Door Coaching Group, we welcome you to this keynote session. I wanted to just say a particular appreciation to Natalie, who's been doing so many sessions and keeping her wonderful positive energy, and also the other core team at Open Door, Nick, who's with us today, behind the scenes doing the technical side, Sonia and Bridget, they've all been tremendous, and my own team at Synergy Global, just behind the scenes. You sometimes don't realize all the work that goes into these conferences, and I just wanted to give our heartfelt appreciation to you.
Thank you.
If you did miss Charlie's session yesterday, it will be recorded, and the recording for that and this will be going out to you next week. So I'd just like to start with our acknowledgement to country. Nick, if we could have the next slide, please. Thank you. We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet today and their continuing connection to the land, waters and communities of Australia. We pay our respects to them and to their elders past, present and emerging. We have the next slide. Thank you. So we had the fantastic Hubble video and the big Hubble story from Charlie yesterday, and today we're going to focus on his 4D systems, how NASA builds high-performing teams. If we could have the next slide, please. Nick, could we have the next? Thank you so much. Thanks.
It just takes a little moment to load up.
Yeah, there's a little delay actually on broadband this morning. It's a little slow at the beach. I've taken my picture off, and there may be a slight delay with the slides. Very difficult to put Charlie's CV on one slide. It's very interesting to read, and I'm enjoying his biography at the moment, which is fascinating. So I'll just give you some highlights here. Natalie introduced him fully yesterday. In his 20s, Charlie was an engineer, inventor, and research astrophysicist, earning a BSc in physics, a master's and a PhD in astrophysics, along with many prestigious awards from NASA. By the time he was 30, Charlie was a well-published author and became interested in leadership. In his 40s, he was NASA's director of astrophysics, launching 12 satellites with a budget of $750 million a year. That's US dollars, one of the largest scientific programs in history. And in 1990, the world discovered the Hubble Space Telescope, had the flawed mirror, and Charlie mounted the daring space repair mission to fix it. He later developed NASA's Cold War strategy and was awarded NASA's Distinguished Service Medal, which is given when the contribution is so extraordinary that other forms of recognition would be inadequate. In his 50s and 60s, he became a professor of leadership at Colorado's Business School, later founding 4D systems and running workshops on what he'd learned. He added ICF credentialed coaching for sustainable behavioral and cultural change with online assessments. And in 2007, his 4D systems team won the ICF Prism Award for enhanced excellence and business achievement with documented return on investment. He now supports his well-credentialed and experienced 4D consultants with our global rollout and leveraging that wisdom to make the world a better place. It is a great pleasure to have Charlie with us today. And I'm just going to go to the abstract on the next slide, please, Nick.
Coming up for you now.
It will. It's a good chance to do a breathing exercise and remain mindful, isn't it, really? So what we're hoping to hear from Charlie today is really what he's learned from working with over 1,000 teams to enhance performance, and particularly working at NASA with risk management. The journey began in 1990 when he was in his 8th year of leading the Hubble Telescope development team. Having built and launched the world's most anticipated telescope, he discovered that it had got the flawed mirror and was useless. When he thought things couldn't get any worse, the Failure Review Board reported that the root cause was a leadership failure, and Charlie was the team leader. After he mounted the space repair mission, he dedicated himself to understanding exactly how those social forces affect people and teams. And in this session, we'll be discussing Charlie's 4D systems model and what's behind its design, and how it can be used to transform behaviours for cultural change. And that's actually a holistic model in our own lives as well as in business, which I know we'll be touching on. He'll cover the 4 colourful dimensions, 2 on the people side, 2 on the task side, and we'll also be going into the 8 core behaviours that make a difference and why. So we've got a very experienced group of participants today, Charlie, who will be hanging on your every word. I hope that the chat box will be busy with some great questions, but also it's a time to share expertise. And when we touch on the behaviours, I know a lot of people work with behavioural change. It's good to hear your input, participants, as well. So we'll start with a couple of questions. I've had the pleasure of partnering with Charlie for the last 10 years and have taken 4D already into a range of Synergy Global clients. It's a marvelous system, and I always think that it takes intelligent people to simplify things down to basics. So it looks like a simple model, but it's incredibly powerful. I always remember that quote with Churchill saying, "I'm sorry, I did not have time to write a short letter," when he synthesized thinking. And I think that's just what Charlie's done. So my first question is, when did you realize that this simple model would be so effective, Charlie?
So let me talk about how it came about. I was teaching in the business school, and I was teaching 3 4-credit classes a semester. I had summers basically off. And at that time, I was looking at business books. I noticed they're all the same. They had these anecdotes about Bill Gates or Andy Grove or somebody. And then someplace in the book, there's a list of the things you're supposed to do. Now, physicists don't like lists. We like equations and formulas, and we like analytical methods. So I put the top things from all the business books I'd read in my office wall on charts, and I began applying tools from physics, trying to find some organizing system, and I failed completely. And I'll explain later if you want to know why, because now I know why that was impossible. But the day I failed, I picked up the daily newspaper, and there was a Dilbert cartoon. The Dilbert cartoon said every consultant makes his living with a 2x2 matrix, and I said, I made this too hard. It's an XY Cartesian system. Which one? At the time, I was reading Jung's work on psychological types. I decided to lay out the aspects of Jung's work on the coordinate axes of this tool. And it defined 4 areas. So what I began to do is using this like an equation as an analytical tool. So I began to analyze projects that I'd worked on that had failed, like Hubble, and projects of maybe greater complexity that were completely successful that worked. And I found this tool could predict success and failure. Then living in Boulder, the local newspaper had a lot of articles about me and Hubble. And people were calling me up and asking me things like, I submitted a proposal to Ball Aerospace for a building. Will you tell me if I'm going to win or not? And so I would ask them to characterize their building in one of the 4, I call them dimensions, then tell me who's going to make the selection, and I could predict accurately whether you're going to win or not, almost with 100% confidence. Also, the university had a thing called the foundation, and that's a nice word for raising money, and had a lot of events for faculty going to speak for people to give money to this university. I'm guessing there's maybe 1,000 faculty there, and I'm only there on a 2-year appointment. I ended up being the primary spokesperson speaking to the donors with this model. And so people just loved hearing about this. And so through the years, it's just become just amazing. And just to cap it off, actually, I probably worked with 2,000 teams. And I had the biggest intervention, the biggest HR intervention by far NASA's ever had. And I'm a scientist. I'm not even in the field. So I'm an experimental physicist. I'm interested in things that work. And fundamentally, the tool works in many, many levels.
It certainly does. And I'm going to have to update the slide now. 2,000 teams, that's pretty solid. I think you've been doing this for something like 11 or 12 years. So it's even a longitudinal study of evidence base, isn't it, Charlie?
Well, I've been doing it 25 years. I think I've probably done 400 workshops, and I'm sure that more than way over 100,000 people in China, including many, many trainers, have been exposed to this work.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have a look at the model next. So I would love you to talk about the two sides of the model and the 4 dimensions to begin with before we get into the specific behaviors. And with so many leadership attributes out there, so many leadership books and programs, what made you pick these 4 as being the most important, Charlie?
Well, it was the Jungian psychology. And so I've always been a fan of Jung and read his work, and I looked at it, and so Einstein said everything should be made as simple as possible, but not more so. So here's what I saw when I laid the coordinate system down. That Jung said we build our personalities on 2 processes: how we make decisions, the information we prefer, and how we make decisions. Now, I knew the answer to both of those questions already. I knew that there are 2 ways we make decisions. About half of us prefer emotional deciding, half of us prefer logical deciding. So I worked with a lot of engineers, and one guy raised his hand in a workshop and said, I can't believe anybody would make any important decision based on emotions. And I said, well, how'd you pick your wife? With a questionnaire? He said, matter of fact. So those are the 2 ways we decide. And there's 2 kinds of information: the intuition, which is an unconscious integration of past experience. A guy named Gary Klein wrote a book about this, and I liked what he said. He said that basically he talked about firemen who went into a building that's on fire and they thought the roof is on fire. And the more experienced firemen said, we got to get out of here now. And the younger fireman said, I don't know what the problem is. And so he said, just get out. It turned out that he had somehow sensed in a way he couldn't name that the floor was on fire. So now you see the input and output, the decisions on the horizontal axis and the information on the vertical axis. And I went to Jung's work, and he said, if you build a personality on intuition as a primary information source and emotion as a primary deciding force, you're going to be most naturally able to appreciate people. And I like that because I'm also very interested in fundamental things like needs hierarchy and feeling appreciated. Nick, why don't you advance and see what comes up? Feeling appreciated meets a deep, deep human need. For emotional deciding and sensing, oh, that's about relationship. And I already knew we all have a very deep need to feel included in groups. We're tribal at our core. For intuitive information and logical deciding, oh, that's about ideas and big ideas. Oh, let's call that vision. And by the way, I colored cultivating green because appreciation grows people. I colored including yellow because I ran out of primary colors. I colored blue, visioning, blue for blue sky thinking. And I colored orange directing. And you could think about our sun being orange. Now, I mentioned I work a lot in China. So they raise their hand and say, Charlie, why didn't you pick red? And I said, well, red is a good color in the East, but not in the West. We think of fires or stoplights. I said, but I want to tell you that I understand the power of red and I harness it. My wife travels with me and she always packs red underpants when I do workshops. So I'm telling you right now, I've got the red underpants on, and that's how I'm harnessing the power of red. So I walked at a workshop with 250 people in Shanghai last year, and I walk in the room and my translator says, they want to see the red underpants. So I thought, oh my, I don't know. Says, yeah, they really want to. So I stood up and I turned sideways and I sort of lowered my pants and showed the red underpants. And what I forgot is that 250 Chinese people means there's 250 video cameras in the room. So this went viral on WeChat. And so in China, I'm going to be known not for Hubble, but for the foreigner with the red underpants.
Somebody said, drop them, Charlie.
I saw that. Nope.
People want proof.
My lesson.
New
Yeah,
definition
how
of
do we get this back on track?
So advance.
All right, here we go.
You go to the next one here. So we've looked at the dimensions. You just go straight into the 8 core behaviors and your experience, Charlie.
Well, so I'm always tying things back to first principles. That's what physicists do. And so I'm interested in the deepest human needs. So appreciation was pretty straightforward. I got onto this because I went to a workshop on Jungian male archetypes by 2 authors of a book. And they said males exist in 1 of 4 archetypes, and one was the king. And I decided I was in the king archetype because I had this big job and all these people and all these things. And in that workshop, they said, the only legitimate function of the king is to bless the subjects. And so when I went back into work the next day, I've got a very keenly critical mind, as you might imagine. I imagined I had this scepter, and when someone came in and showed me something they had done, I imaginary that I'm blessing them, I'm appreciating them. And again, I'm an experimental physicist, so I'm interested in what works. And the energy and aliveness in my division went crazy. People just got so energized, but even bigger, with this social context of mutual respect, they're telling unfortunate realities. And this is really important. So that's solid. And by the way, all the behaviors have a long checklist of why they're included. The shared interest piece is is very powerful. And again, I use it in my own life. It's about asking this very simple question. What do they want that I can want for them also? It's that easy to do. And so I'm divorced many years ago. And when I divorced, I asked myself, what was the core problem? And the core problem is I was married when I was 22, and we had no shared interest of anything, zero. I mean, not friends, not music, not anything. So before I remarried, I did an inventory of shared interest with my wife-to-be, and there were tons of them. And then I looked at interests we don't share. By the way, interests we share: travel, we both like history, we both like art, we both like classical music, we both like to drink wine, we like to eat seafood. Interest we don't share is she's an orthodontist. I don't care about other people's teeth, and she's not too interested in physics. So that's okay, just so you have more shared interest. So that's very, very powerful. Heather Jane? No. Okay.
Yeah, but go ahead, Charlie.
So the next one is about trustworthiness and inclusion. And I already knew that we need to feel included. In fact, people who feel excluded tend to act out the anger, and people go postal. That's what causes this. Exclusion creates anger, and we can't have that. so appropriately include people, and you want to include people adequately, but not too much. And so that's a big behavior. And then trustworthiness. Think about how does trustworthiness affect your life. It's every dimension of everything. It's your children, it's your co-workers, it's your family, it's your customers, it's everybody. So always looking, what is the simplest thing you can do to establish your trustworthiness? It's live in integrity. Integrity means that your words match your deeds, and so you rigorously keep your agreements. So that's that piece. The next piece, there we go. There we go. Go ahead and go to the whole slide. So the next piece, I struggled for many years. Oh, by the way, 100% committed. I talked a little bit about that yesterday. This focus on purpose. Decide if you could do one thing to make your life successful, it's find the outcomes you're committed to realizing and commit to them 100%. What that means is a state of focus. It's a mindfulness thing that you're going to just focus on that. I talked about this yesterday with the Hubble servicing mission. There's even more to be said about this with the Great Observatories program that I'm 100% committed to. And so people say to me, well, how can I be 100% committed to more than one thing? when I'm doing workshops, I'm 100% committed to that workshop. I am not, my mind is not on anything else. I have no email. My phone's put away. Why do I have to do that? Because I've got to be four-dimensional. People have to feel appreciated by me. They got to feel in relationship with me. I got to be creative enough to respond to what's new, and I've got to be organized to get through the material in the right way. So that I combine with a second behavior, which is addressing unfortunate realities. So for the first 10 years, I tried to find something that could stimulate creativity, and I couldn't find. I read books and bought these stupid games. Finally, I read an otherwise uninteresting book, and it talked about the best way to create is to address unfortunate realities, and that works. Again, not tested. But Ray Dalio, you may know this name. He's one of the richest people in the world, and he's dedicated his life to helping other people. Now he's got many billions of dollars, and he has these life rules. And the number one rule is address unfortunate, unpleasant realities, especially when they're unpleasant. So that one is pretty straightforward. And then the next piece is around drama states. So drama states are destructive misdirections of your energy. And there are 3 in the classical literature, but the 4D system shows 4. The victim, who says it's hopeless and does nothing. The rescuer, out of relational needs, takes on work they shouldn't to be liked. The rescuer, who goes up, the rationalizer goes up in their head to try and process, remove an uncomfortable emotion with a thought, which doesn't work because emotions are body experiences, and our baby blanket-sized cerebral cortex can't do it. And the most interesting one is the blamer. The blamer, because it's driven by self-anger projected outward. So this has strategies to notice you're in a drama state, check with the thought which one you're in, and then very specific ways to get back out of it. Then finally, roles, accountability, and authority. And this is an interesting one. I built a project processes tool on the same software backbone as this tool, and I wanted them to overlink to have an interrelationship. So I put this measurement of this very important part, and this is about what people expect of you, and if you meet their expectations, you will be seen as successful and be rewarded. And I ran the tool with lots and lots of flight project teams. That was my early work. I was astounded to find how often this is not tended to. So every one of them has a story about it. Every one of them has very specific instructions how to do it. The difference between me and I think most academics is most of these books tell you what to do, but they don't tell you how to do it. And I tell you how to do it. That's my game. And these 8 behaviors have stood the test of time. Good enough?
It is a very practical model. We've got a couple of questions. If we go to the next slide, we can always come back to this when we get into more depth.
Okay.
Thanks, Nick. We just move on to the next slide. Jonathan's just asked an interesting question. Charlie, is there any relationship between the 4D model and Ken Wilber's integral model?
You know, I don't work in this field, so I don't know much about these other models. I'm a physicist doing this work, so I don't know. I do think I have analyzed some things, and from my vantage point, they're not. So everybody knows the name Sir Isaac Newton, but I could name lots of other people who worked on gravity that you never heard of. Why do we know Newton? Because he gave us an equation, F equals ma. With that equation, a physicist can do the math to land something on the moon. This is a tool like an equation. This is not a set of rules. This is not like anything else that I know in the field. And I've analyzed half a dozen things, but not Ken Wilber. So this is an equation. You can, like I started off with, I can predict success and failure of projects. I can predict you win proposals or not. I won $10 billion of work for an aerospace company using this tool that they would have lost otherwise. I can organize personalities. I can help you pick an optimal job. It's a tool. That's the difference with this and everything else I've seen.
Thanks, Charlie. There's another one here from Nathan. It's the question, I think it's on the next slide, that I asked, which was, which dimension do you find is most influential for an effective leader? Just take that before we go forward.
Well, so what's interesting is that the two things that matter most are both on the emotional side. And when I discovered that, being a person who in my early life aspired to be, you know, Mr. Spock, this was kind of surprising. But if you're going to master one thing, it's appreciation. This opens up everything. And I use this as a habit, and I'll just tell a little anecdote about this. My wife and I go to a store called Costco. I think you have them in Australia anyway. And usually we walk in the store and my energy starts to drain and her energy starts to go up. So the struggle between us starts with me trying to get us out of there as quickly as possible, her wanting to roam around and look as long as possible. But one day I'm particularly tired. I've got to drive back through the city of Boulder where the speed limit drops very rapidly. And I'm zoned out. I'm like, so lights behind me, police pulls me over. And this was completely authentic for me. Otherwise, this won't work. So he came up to me, got my paperwork, and then he came back and I said, I really want to appreciate you for this. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you've done this. He looks at me like I'm crazy. And I said, let me explain why. First, I was zoned out. I was a hazard to myself and others. And boy, I'll tell you, I really appreciate that you brought my attention to that. But here's what I know, that if I get a speeding ticket, I get a reduction in my probability of an accident of 50% for 18 months. That's a really valuable thing for me to have. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So he's giving me an envelope before I said that. I go home, it wants a $100 check. I put it in, I send it off to the city, and it comes back and they said, we have no record of this ticket. So my translator hears this story, and she's traveling in Florida with her boss. He's speeding, police pulls him over, and he heard the story too, so he starts to tell the policeman. The policeman says, that's a bunch of bullcrap, don't give me that. And she says, wait a minute, let me speak. And she spoke it from the heart, authentically, and he said, oh my God, no, tore the ticket up. Then the person who hires both of us was a month later in Beijing, and her car was parked in a place it shouldn't have been with the driver, and the policeman and the driver arguing with each other. And she comes up and says, yeah, right. She says, thank you very much for your diligence, helping keep things safe for us in Beijing, Bob. And he turns to the driver and said, you should have an attitude more like hers. And she tears the ticket up. He tears the ticket up. So it's not just about tickets. It's about enriching every part of your life. And once it becomes a habit, it doesn't take any time because you just do it automatically. Inclusion is next. And again, people who feel excluded get angry. So in a workshop, I have people talk about when they felt excluded and how it made them feel. And I always believe anything that requires some vulnerability, that I should model it myself first. So what I do is I talk about the fact that my father was an Air Force pilot, and we travel constantly. And I'm always being dropped into schools in the middle of the school year. Everybody else knew everybody, so I'm pretty well excluded. But also I have a visual disability that gives me no depth perception. So I was terrible in sports. And I was always the last person to be picked for sports. So those are the two that I think, if you want to focus on the first one, make appreciation a habit. And second, ask what do they want that I can want for them also. Or the inclusion piece too. Those are powerful.
Thanks, Charlie. We've got a question here from Jody. Have you seen any backtracking from agreements that are important to teams, but rapidly changing environments make them no longer possible? How has trust been maintained?
So the issue is being in a state of integrity. So the first thing you do is I teach people that you renegotiate agreements before you break them. And that sustains your integrity, and that works extremely well. That's a habit to develop. However, everyone breaks agreements. Poor planning, unexpected circumstances. Even I broke, I think, maybe 2 agreements this year. So imagine this, that I agreed to be on this call at my 5 p.m. I fell asleep. I got up in time, then I couldn't get the internet to work, it's not functioning well. I can't find the link, I find it, still I'm there in time, but the internet doesn't come on. So have I got a broken agreement with you, even though I did everything I could and still couldn't get there? Yes, so here's how you process back into integrity. It's a 5-step process. First, you tell the truth. I broke my agreement with you. Then you say, what happened? What happened was that I took a nap when I shouldn't have, I didn't prepare for the meeting as I should have, and that's what occurred. How will I prevent this in the future? Anything like this in the future, I will do a dry run ahead of time. I'll set a timer and make sure this doesn't happen. And then you say, are we okay now? And if they're not, you keep the process going, but you process broken agreements to get back into integrity. That's how it's done.
Thank you for sharing that. We do cover that well in the workshop, and it's one of the hardest things, I think, to cover in the workshop, because people don't get it to begin with. They think it's laborious. Once they've practiced it, they get it very quickly and they realize how powerful it is. And one of the key behaviors is, of course, keeping agreements. And that links very well with the being 100% committed. Charlie, I wonder whether you can talk now to this slide, and particularly talk about some of the evidence base and the metrics around the bit that we missed earlier, which was the team development assessments and the individual development assessments that you've developed, and why it's important that we integrate both of those to get the most solid results.
So when I was working as a consultant, I had a team. I was asked to work with a team that I didn't like being with, and I would not have gone back, except it was my best and most important client. She kept saying, well, go try again. So I'm looking at them, and what I realized was happening was my client's team leader was good up and toxic down, and the sub team from another company that was essential to their win was the guy was abusing him and blaming everything on him. So I went to the management. At that time, the head of the company, TRW, big aerospace company, would talk to me, and I said, "You got to replace this person. That's your problem." Now they had no trouble acting on my recommendations when it was about the person's color being the wrong color for the job, but they didn't have any direct experience. So I said, "I've got to take data." So I took out a piece of paper and I put the 8 behaviors on it, and I drew concentric circles, and they were being graded by their customer with colors. Blue was the best, green, red, yellow, and red. So I said, start with put down which two teams you're on. Rate first the TRW team leader, then the Raytheon team leader, then yourself, and put your name on it. I brought these back and I compiled the data, and you could see that the universal opinion was that the TRW guy was the problem. So these companies need data. I went and put the chart in front of my client, said, he's gone. That's it. I've done it. So they did, and they won the proposal, which happened to be a $10 billion program. It's a non-trivial thing. So I'm riding back home on the airplane, and I'm thinking, that works so well. Why don't I make an online tool? So I did, and began to use it to evaluate, not to evaluate, but to support people learning, and particularly people in leadership positions with the individual version of it. Then I started to think about the social effect of team social context and changed it, made an additional tool to measure teams' behavioral norms. And that's the distribution function that you see here. That's how the data sorted out. And we've done, gosh, I don't know, 20,000 of these. What happened was that we noticed something. I got a big NASA contract, noticed something very peculiar with this measurement. The measurement for teams on their first measurement we'd never worked with before was moving gradually upward. And I wondered, what could this be? Now, in those days, I had individual scores and team scores for every team in a workshop. We did everybody both. So I did correlation analysis, because what I assumed was happening was that we had a toxic team that was attracting more toxic people, because that happens in mental health places. That wasn't it at all. There were extraneous factors that were causing this. And what I did correlation analysis with various segments where we'd done fewer and more measurements. And so what was happening was we were changing the entire agency of NASA. Even people we'd never interacted with were changing their behaviors. Why? Because if you're on a team and you learn this habit of expressing appreciation working within your team, and you go talk to somebody else and you express appreciation for them, they experience it. It makes it easier for them to appreciate. So we've created a forward feedback loop. So we changed the whole agency. There's no evidence for this anyone else has ever seen. So what happened was, we're working with hundreds of teams, we began to see a very strong correlation between where the team benchmarked and what the performance was, both as named by the team leader, the team members, and everybody outside. So what I began to do is use this tool, and in 2008, we made an incredible discovery. This ranks up with the most amazing thing I've ever seen. This tool, which takes 15 minutes to answer 10 questions and about an hour to process, was improving team performance by something like 4% every time they did it. This is unthinkable. So when I saw those data, I said, this does not belong to me. This belongs to the world. And I took two decisions. I decided in that moment that I would make all of our intellectual property free, and Heather Jane has it all. You can get it from her. It's free to her and free to you, everything. And I started to write the manuscript for how NASA builds teams. And so, so what is the difference? A bottom quintile team, people don't feel appreciated. They're full of conflict because no one's addressing shared interest. You have the anger of exclusion. You have low trust. Blind optimism replaces reality. Low commitment to anything. It's full of victims and blamers, and it's disorganized. I think you could see that would be a poor performing team. A high performing team, mutual respect and high collaboration. People happy, they feel included, trust is high. They're in grounded optimism with high commitment, or what I would say, addressing unfortunate realities. There's no drama, and everybody knows what's expected. I think you can see how that would be a high performance team. Now, how do I use this work? I learned to never agree to do a workshop for a team without taking data first, because when the team is in the bottom quintile, they can't learn. And you can read in my book or in some materials from Heather Jane, there are common factors that cause teams to be down here. There are things like the budget's grossly inadequate, the technology can't be done, the team leader's incompetent. These are common things. So I'd make a list of these for a bottom quintile team and say, which of these are in play? And you'd be surprised how often somebody might say, I think I may be the team leader, so I might be the problem. How do I find out? We run an IDA to find out. That's how you can learn. So once they're out of the bottom, I could do a workshop with them. And I've used this tool, this TDA tool, and IDAs for all the key people. The hierarchical leaders, the key people that are key technical leaders, they use the IDA also. I can move a team reliably from the bottom to the top in 18 months by doing this tool every 3 or 4 months and one workshop. That's how I got the Prism Award for returns. This is so inexpensive. And everyone around these teams, management would say, what happened to you? And so the word got out, and there was far more demand than NASA could afford to budget. Never happened in HR before for this work. So does that help?
Thank you very much, Charlie. One of the things that certainly help when we do the workshops and the underpinning coaching is the quality of feedback in organizations really improves. Charlie talked about the forward feedback. That cascade effect for behavioral change is massive. And people learn when they're actually filling out the individual performance assessments, the development assessments, that they should be much more specific in what they're saying in specific behavioral terms. And so their skill set increases dramatically. So the first time we run the cert cycle, they're not so good and they learn from that. And it's an iterative process, running them both together. I'd like to take a question from Gerald, actually, Charlie. He says, amazing content. I wonder if political leaders around the world if they would have applied 4D coherently, what would be your estimation of the effects on COVID-19? And could it have saved lives and economic disasters?
There's no doubt. I mean, there are two really interesting models in the U.S. that the one I watch daily, it's Governor of New York, Cuomo, who has these incredibly inspiring 4D things. They're full of appreciation. They're full of inclusion. For example, yesterday he invited governors from 5 neighboring states on with him. It's full of reality. It's all data-based, charts and numbers. It's there's no drama. And compare him to another NASA official that I think you know who I'm talking about, that has none of those things. And we're all trying to find a way to make him president, make Cuomo president. His approval ratings are like 90%. There's no American politician that's ever gotten. And it's just doing this stuff. He never came to a 4D class, but he knew. And New York has the best numbers in everything in the U.S. Relative to this. Now, I'll share a little footnote. Many years ago, when I was pretty naive, I thought that I could help the Congress of the U.S. And now I know I can't. And the reason is they don't want to be helped. So someone's got to want to be able to perform better. And I love the governor. The other day, someone said, how would you rate your performance with the COVID-19? He said, gave it my best. I thought, what a perfect answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to go to the next slide, just see what we've got left? I know that I would like to just go in the last, we've got 15 minutes left actually. So there's plenty of time for more questions. So now's a good time to think about what you want to ask Charlie and pop it into chat. Please make sure you put it to panelists and attendees. Nick's looking at that. We know that you've been taking 4D around the world for decades now, and you've been working with a lot of different cultures. And I just wondered if you struggled at all with any of the key concepts in a particular culture. You and I were talking about generations and the differences between baby boomers and stuff the other day. Would you like to make a comment about that, Charlie?
Yeah, so I recently got some comments asking me if I was able to speak to millennials. And it caused me to go back and look through the workshop material. And what I was looking for is anything in there that wasn't grounded in first principles. What do I mean by first principle? It's a core human need to feel appreciated. It's a core human need to feel included. Those are first principles. They've got to be addressed. They're timeless. Many of the quotes in my workshop are 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years old. People have been thinking about these things for a long time, and I could not. I may not have been 100% accurate, but I couldn't find anything that reflected my boomer background. I'm an early boomer, so I got questions in let me think here. In the past year, I did a workshop in Novosibirsk in Siberia, did a workshop in Berlin. I do workshops. I have been till now doing 2 months a year in China with 3 or 4 workshops every time. And some of them have 200 or 300 people in them. So, and most of them are trainers. So early on, someone said to me, you know, we need to feel appreciated in the US. We understand that, but do you know we need it in China? I said, it's primates. It's dogs need love. Okay, it's everywhere. So yeah, no. In places I've struggled with the key concepts. Let me think a minute here. I had one funny occasion. I was in what was the town? Small city in Hamburg doing a workshop, and a guy came up to me and he said, "You know, I just want to tell you, this was such a beautiful thing. This was the best thing I've ever seen. But you need to know that we Germans don't give appreciation." And I said, "Do you realize what you just did?"
Yeah, great example. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
realize it.
What I find is that people like the elegance and simplicity and the structure, and I hear it all the time. So no, I think I can't think of any that hasn't, when I do these workshops, I don't get numbers in China, they just don't bother, but I get love notes from everybody. I get standing applause before each break. I get people coming up and hugging me, men and women, saying, "I love you, Charlie." No, I can't think of any. Again, recently in Novosibirsk, same thing. So let me talk about one other little feature. So in the workshops for many years, I've been having people do, I put up a slide, have people do a plus delta at the end of every day. And I tell them that I'm going to read them the first thing in the morning. So you might think of what you write. Plus meaning what worked for you in the workshop, and delta, what would you like me to change tomorrow? And sometimes it's about the food or snacks or something. So anyway, so I read them at night. I look at them, and if I can do something differently, I do. I read them in the morning. And early on, the delta that I got most was, we don't want a generic workshop. We want a workshop about us. And of course, you know, this is some fundamental feature of people. We like things when they're about us. So I took this context shifting worksheet, which basically does the whole workshop in about 1 hour, and I embedded it in the workshop. And so for every workshop in the US, which is only intact teams, they pick a situation and they go through the recording notes in their worksheet and end up with actions. And typical situations are things like, we don't trust each other, we can't communicate with customers, this kind of thing. In China, the workshops are almost always public workshops. And I've experimented with this and found something that they really like to work on is, I cannot motivate or communicate with, parenthesis, my children. And the energy around this and the realizations they get about the unfortunate realities, about the broken agreements with their children, it's just amazing to watch. So that's a key thing I wanted to mention, that if you do this work, you will always be picking something and they'll be applying it. And the way I do this is we take a topic like, for example, the emotions involved. I go through with the open room, I do it on a flip chart, you put candidates up, then people go on their worksheet and write down the emotion they're actually experiencing. So when they leave, they've got an action plan to address something that they never had before.
It is very practical, and people do rave about all the takeaways that they can put straight back into practice at home and at work the next day, literally, and that's why we found it so powerful. I wonder, Charlie, you'd mentioned the two human needs on the emotional side, very much the need to be appreciated, the need to be included. Can you talk a little bit about the blue and the orange side, about the human needs that underpinned your thinking with visioning and directing dimensions?
Yeah, I think that you need realistic hope to get out of bed in the morning and go into the day. And so 100% committed to, for example, for me, I'm 100% committed to having a good experience during this shutdown and looking at the, so my wife and I take long walks every day. We never did that before. I don't go out. At my age, is too dangerous. And neighbors buy food for us, and we've gotten closer with them. There's just a lot more love in our life as a result of what's going on. 100% committed to that. And the unfortunate reality is that this is going to go on, I think, for a very long time. So we're preparing with food, water, electricity, things like that, to be in our house, and having, frankly, a good experience closer to my children. I'm doing video chats like this with people much more. I've got several people that I talk with in foreign countries where we once a week we just talk about the 4D work or our lives or whatever. So that's how that works. And in the drama state. So here's what you do. I show you that you can build any mindset you want by the combination of emotion and thought. But what you can't do is automatically choose your emotions, but you can always choose your thoughts. So, for example, to avoid being, I'm not prone to victim, but if I was, what I would do is I would monitor this. I got this from somatic psychology. I've got a certification in somatic psychology too. I sort of pay attention to how I'm feeling. If I'm feeling good, I'm feeling good. If I'm not feeling good, I ask myself, what is the thought that's making me feel lousy? If it's aversion around something around, it's hopeless, nothing I can do, oh, that's a victim storyline. I know how to deal with that. I turn complaints into requests. How do I do that? I make a 4D request. So let's take, for example, my boss doesn't listen to me. So how do I get out of victim? I decide I make a request to the boss and I make it 4-dimensionally in this sequence. I deal with the deepest need first, the green need. So I appreciate what you're trying to do. I appreciate how hard you work. And, you know, I'm generally pretty happy to be able to support you. We've met their deep green need, including, I want to collaborate with you to make sure that I am doing what you need me to do, because I don't want to be doing things that aren't what you need. We've hit the second big need. We've hit the including, the collaboration. The unfortunate reality is that I'm not sure I'm doing this right. And I want you to know I'm 100% committed to finding out what I have to do and doing it. We hit the blue need. Free of drama, you make a request. Would you be willing to meet with me on every Monday morning, 15 minutes, and sort out my priorities for the week? That's the alternative to sitting in victim. This is moving from the state of victim, which is a state of being, into the state of responsibility, which I hyphen the word able to respond, your ability to respond. So that's how the whole thing works together.
Thanks, Charlie. That's very clear and a great example of how to do a 4D request. It's much more likely to be answered positively because you're hitting all 4 areas. And it doesn't take long to write it in an email either. Got a couple more questions for you here, Charlie. Jody Steele, for the curve with the low to high performing teams, on the slide that we showed, it appeared to be more skewed to the red side than the green. Is that what the data shows? And if so, what is the cause?
That's just the data. You know, I don't know. What's interesting is the individual curve is actually quite different. And that I've pondered quite a while. And I think it's we behave differently one-on-one than we do in groups. But it's just data. That's all it is. So I think what I say to people is think about whether if you have your anniversary dinner, assuming restaurants get back open, would you rather go to a restaurant where most of the people are in tables of 2, or would you like to have your dinner next to a table of 30 people? The behavior is very different. So I don't know. I've never thought much. It's interesting that it's not a normal distribution, it's a skewed distribution. And it's just how the data come out. And by the way, these are broken into 5 equal area things called quintiles. And I think the precision of the measurement is something like half a quintile. It's not much better because the curves, the typical curves look more or less like this, of course. And we make averages, but average doesn't really apply except to a normal distribution. These are skewed normal distributions, but it's the best estimate I can make.
Okay, thank you. Got another question coming up, but one of the things I'd like to say is what our clients really appreciate is when they've done the team development assessment and individual development assessments, what it does is it points out what you can appreciate about what is working well with the team. And you might have 6 of the behaviors working really quite well, and you can appreciate that. What you can then do is really focus on the 2 that people are being tripped up with.
Exactly.
And that means you're focusing your development resources to where it's really going to make the biggest difference. And I think that's an important thing to mention. Shirley's got a question here for you, Charlie. How do you work, sorry, just jumping around. How do you work with senior managers whose view of their direct reports is kind of, direct reports problems is kind of suck it up?
You know, I estimate maybe 5% of managers, this doesn't work for them. That's pretty much it. And my approach has always been to every client, I will not work with a team leader that doesn't want to do this work, because it's a waste of my time, it's a waste of theirs. So you ask them, is this something that you want to learn? And if they say, no, I prefer the suck it up model, then you just go elsewhere. You can't fix everybody.
I know that's right. We've only got 5 minutes to go. Thank you for the reminder, Nick. I'll take one more question. And also, one of the questions I'd posed was, you're very good on humor, and I've always enjoyed your sense of humor, Charlie. You always start sessions with a joke. We start our newsletters with a joke, and we might be able to end with something light here today. Jody says, I love the simplicity of the thinking for the uptake of ownership of the behaviours. What's your favourite success story? It'll have to be a short one, maybe a humorous one, but I think we should end on that before I do the thank yous. Charlie.
Well, look, so I had a flight project team. These are NASA flight projects with many millions of dollars. Typical cheap one would be $500 million. So I did the TDA and the teams in the bottom quintile. So I laid down the list of factors and said, number one is ineffective team leader. And because I don't have any authority, people open up to me usually, or I think always. And she said, no, I think it might be me. I got the job because I'm a good technical person. And I don't even like working with people. And I said, well, thank you for sharing that. Here's what I'd like to do. I knew the director of flight projects at this NASA center. I said, let's go together and speak with him. He's a good person. And let's tell him the situation. Let's see if we can't get you into a technical track job. Most NASA centers have technical track jobs and management track jobs. Get you into a technical track job that you can do well, and do it in a way that preserves your face and your salary and everything else. So I went up and I explained the situation with her next to me. He said, thank you for coming by. And she said, I can take care of this. So as we walked out, she said, you know, you saved me from a horrible fate. Because if I had stayed in a job I wasn't able to do, I would have failed. And this was great. So that team then got a new project manager and moved from the bottom to the top in record time, stayed at the top. And the new team leader was so grateful that he goes around the country making speeches about 4D systems, even though he's a NASA project manager. So that's probably my favorite, of having the combination of the honesty, the self-awareness, the personnel change, and the team performance.
Thank you so much, Charlie. On behalf of everybody, we have to wrap it up now to keep to time. On behalf of everybody from Synergy Global and from the Open Door team, and Nick for sorting the slides out for us this morning. Charlie, thank you so much. Another great session. You've done 2 for us this week, and people will enjoy reviewing them, as I will, when we listen to the recordings. Thank you to all the participants for the interesting comments and questions. Lots and lots of thank yous, and love coming your way, Charlie. So I hope you feel appreciated. You stay safe there, and I will be chatting to you soon. So take great care, everybody. Thank you very much indeed.
I see lots of mastery of appreciation. Thank you.
Yes.